Grace and peace. My name's Ryan. I'm the movie pastor. I have a movie pass that lets me see movies for free. Well, for a monthly free fee, but I see an unlimited number of them. And I'm also a pastor. I work as the pastor of College Park Presbyterian Church, where I preach every Sunday. And so when I see movies, I think theologically about them, and I talk about what it is that they have to say to us and to our society. What's the messaging? How do we interpret the text the way I've been trained to interpret the Bible? Well, Dr. Sleep is interesting from this perspective. One of the first important questions to ask when we go about interpreting any text is, who is the author? Because if we want to interpret the text literally, if we want to gain an understanding of its literal sense as best as we can, and I think even if that's not where we want to end up in our interpretation of the text, that's something we want to be aware of as we interpret. We want to know what the original author intended to communicate to their original audience. Well, that can be complicated because sometimes texts do not have a single author. Sometimes they've gone through redaction, and we can talk about redaction criticism for the biblical text, where a committee has all put their hands on a text, or it passed hands from one group to another group, and those groups altered key portions of it. And so we have to ask, who is the final author? Whose intention are we really looking for? Well, movies are always like that, to a greater and lesser extent. Sometimes you see a great auteur filmmaker like Terrence Malick, who is famous for really having a vision and controlling every aspect of the production. Sometimes individual actors have a whole lot of say in how their characters are portrayed and how the story ends up ultimately being told on screen. Sometimes producers are really the auteurs who ultimately have the vision and control what is going to end up being communicated. In the case of Dr. Sleep, we have three really important authors. One of the first questions people asked when Dr. Sleep was announced was, is this a King sequel or a Kubrick sequel? Because, of course, Stephen King wrote the book Dr. Sleep as a sequel to his book, The Shining. And in Dr. Sleep, King had some intention. He really wrote the book Dr. Sleep as a rebuttal to Stanley Kubrick's movie, which King did not like. Meanwhile, Stanley Kubrick made a movie based on King's book, The Shining, that was really, really popular and really good, frankly. One of the horror classics of our era, and maybe one of the best films ever made. In fact, definitely one of the best films ever made. And so there is, in some ways, an obligation to continue in the legacy of Kubrick's amazing movie. There is also an obligation to stay faithful to Stephen King's book. And Stephen King gave his endorsement, rubber-stamped the movie Dr. Sleep, and did not do so with The Shining. And so there's a sense in which we have to be faithful to Dr. Sleep in a way that The Shining was not faithful to its source. And then, of course, the director, Mike Flanagan, had to have his own things to say. And as a result, I mean, the movie was good. It wasn't great, but it was good. It was disorganized at times. Sometimes you couldn't tell what it was trying to say, and I think there's a reason for that. I think some of that disorganization came from a disunity among the authors. For Stephen King, the story of Dr. Sleep, it seems to me, was primarily, and really of The Shining too, was primarily about addiction. So you see a lot in this movie about addiction and addiction recovery. That's a very spiritual thing to talk about. You know, at one point, the main character, Danny, goes to an AA meeting, and over the course of a montage, you see he's become a member of AA for a long time, to the point where when he goes back to the Overlook Hotel and interacts with the bartender there, he's able to turn down the drink that his dad could not and would not. There's a lot there. You also see a supernatural element. You see the sort of creepy things that were familiar to us in the Kubrick movie, the same ghosts, the return of the woman in the bathtub. And you see these witches, these vampires, these people who are going around and sucking the life out of little children. And they're, of course, a kind of addict as well, but what they're addicted to is steam. And steam is this stuff that in the universe of The Shining, in the universe of Dr. Sleep, comes out of you when you die. If you've got some shine to you, your mist flows out of you, and that you can breathe it in. I thought that was an interesting choice to depict life as breath, because of course that's biblical. In the Bible, we have the word pneuma, which is the spirit that gives you life. The pneuma, it's the same root we get the word pneumatic from. In the Old Testament, we have the word ruach, and there's this understanding that what's you, what makes you, what makes you alive, what makes you vital is not the spark. I think in modern society we talk more about the spark, but in the biblical context, the breath, that you're full of air. And we have people that can breathe that special type of air in The Shining. It speaks to a particular kind of spirituality, a particular kind of supernatural world that we're living in. In the midst of that supernatural world, Danny works as what I would call a hospice chaplain. I mean, he was working as an orderly, but he ended up, because of this cat, in the rooms with people as they are cradled from life to death. And that's a role I've held before. Sitting with people and being with them as they die. And he speaks to them and he says things like, we don't end. We don't end, I'm sure of that. There is life after death. And Danny can be sure of that because he has seen ghosts. Because he's been haunted by ghosts throughout his life, and they're real and they're literal within this universe. But it's interesting that in Dr. Sleep, we're playing with the understanding of life after death. Do you believe in life after death? Do you think we don't end? Do you think we don't stop, that there's something after? Because I think we do, and I think that it's important in a hospice environment, in an end-of-life situation, that you're not alone and that you have someone to comfort you. There's a line in the movie where Danny is talking to the girl who he comes to mentor, and Abra, and he says, I think everyone has a little shine to them, but only so many people know they shine. That there's a little bit of special. There's some of that steam, some of that spirit, some of that specialness in all of us. But not all of us know about it. And so in the context of this movie, you've got on one hand, a universe totally unlike our own. I mean, just I almost wish it didn't have to deal with any of this background and all of these different authors and have an obligation to pay homage to a previous film, so that we could just deal with like a wizard duel, right? Like magical people going at each other's throats. That's an interesting concept. But then in the midst of that, I think it really speaks to us, and it asks questions about how does this magic connect with Alcoholics Anonymous, addiction recovery, hospice work, mental illness? Because we all want to hear the stories about The Shining. We all want to hear the stories about the ghosts, because we all relate to these questions. Questions about life after death. Questions about why cameras turn off suddenly, apparently. Questions about why things have turned out the way they have. What makes some people special and different. And I'm out of steam. I hope that you will like and comment, subscribe, and share. And I'll see you next time. Bye.
And when in scenes of glory I sing the new song, 'twill be